They say a mother's love is infinite, boundless as the sea. I'm here to tell you otherwise. Even the deepest oceans have a flaw. Once you drain them, nothing remains but cracked earth and remnants of what once flourished. My name is Elelena Vance. I am 62. 3 days ago, I made a choice that severed my son's inheritance and, perhaps, altered his understanding of me forever. Yet as I sit on the balcony of my modest apartment, gazing at the gray waters of Seattle Harbor and sipping tea that finally tastes peaceful rather than laced with anxiety, I know I did what had to be done, for both of us. This was not cruelty, though the neighbors back in Bellevue might whisper about my supposed malice. Nor was it reckless, despite my daughter-in-law Harper's shrill cries in the lawyer's office, her neck veins taut like cables under her flawless skin. It was, in truth, an act of love, surgical, exacting, and necessary, like removing a diseased limb to save the rest of the body. The limb in question was my son's sense of entitlement, a weight that had twisted him from a kind, joyful man into someone whose heart measured value like an accountant. To understand why I stripped him of his financial future, you need to know the house. The sprawling Victorian in Port Townsend my late husband, Arthur, and I bought as a ruin 35 years ago. We restored it with our own hands, filling it with warmth and history. We called it the Haven. It was more than wood and stone, it was the embodiment of our marriage, a sanctuary where we weathered storms, raised Julian, and where I held Arthur's hand as he took his last breath 6 years ago, leaving me a widow in a home brimming with memories but hollowed by silence. Julian was everything to me, the center of my world, especially after Arthur died. I poured my life into him, top-tier education, unwavering support, fierce protection that perhaps shielded him too much from reality. He grew into a handsome, ambitious architect, creating grand structures for others while slowly losing the foundations of his own life when he met Harper. Harper came from Mercer Island, a family where people were valued for utility and relationships were strategic. Her mother, Beatrice, wore designer clothes like armor and wielded passive aggression like a scalpel. When Julian and Harper married 4 years ago at a vineyard wedding funded largely by my shrinking retirement, I first glimpsed the storm ahead. At the reception, Beatrice introduced me as Julian's mother, the one with the quaint house in Port Townsend, reducing decades of my life to a single property. I smiled through the humiliation, telling myself it was just her way, and that Julian's happiness was enough. But over time, subtle exclusion became overt. I became peripheral, relegated to the past, while Harper and her mother dictated the present. Calls grew infrequent, Sunday dinners vanished, invitations to their condo politely refused. I told myself to be patient, to respect space, and poured myself into my garden, my rhododendrons Arthur had adored, and the upkeep of the Haven, a task growing ever heavier as I aged alone. Then came the news that should have brought uncontainable joy. Harper was pregnant. I cried with delight as Julian called, trembling, painting visions of little feet running through the Haven, of story times by the fireplace, just as I had with him. I longed to help with the nursery, to knit tiny blankets, to be a grandmother. Each offer was firmly rebuffed. "We've hired a professional interior designer, Mom," Julian said when I suggested painting the nursery. "Beatrice is planning the baby shower," Harper added. "We're doing a modern, organic theme. Your style is a bit vintage." I swallowed my disappointment, clinging to hope that the child's arrival would reconnect us. When Oliver was born on a rainy Tuesday in November, I drove 2 hours to Seattle, gifts in hand, only to be stopped by a nurse. The parents had requested limited visitors. Beatrice was already inside. I waited 4 hours in the lobby, listening to the rain, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. When I finally saw my grandson, Beatrice held him possessively, Harper slept, and Julian looked distant. "Wash your hands, Elelena," Beatrice snapped. "No kissing. Don't spread germs." I held Oliver for precisely 5 minutes before Julian gently took him back. Driving home that night, I understood. I was not family. I was a guest, an outsider. Then the pattern shifted from exclusion to manipulation. Julian called one evening. "Mom, we found a house in Medina. Perfect for Oliver, great schools, big yard," he said warmly. "That's wonderful," I replied. "But the market is insane," he continued. We need a larger down payment, or we lose it to an all-cash buyer. Beatrice offered half. The rest, $100,000, fell to me. I gave the money, sacrificing my security for the illusion of belonging. For 3 months, things seemed brighter. Occasional updates, a barbecue invitation, an hour with Oliver. I convinced myself I had purchased entry into their hearts. But the Medina home was a fortress of glass and steel, cold and impersonal. When I asked to see the promised guest suite, excuses returned. We're settling in, Harper texted. Oliver's teething. Work's been crazy. Finally, 6 months later, I decided to surprise them. I baked Arthur's blackberry pie, packed a bag, and drove down, believing a grandmother should not wait for an invitation. Pulling into the driveway, I saw Beatrice's luxury SUV. Harper opened the door, her face a mask of annoyance. Elelena, what are you doing here? I came to see the house, to see Oliver. I brought a pie. She sighed theatrically. Well, come in, I guess. Don't stay long. Inside, Beatrice sat on the floor playing with Oliver, her eyes sharp as they met mine. Oh, Elelena, we weren't expecting you. I had planned a surprise, though with every step toward their house, my confidence dwindled. I had been looking forward to seeing the guest suite Julian had mentioned, but the look exchanged between Harper and Beatrice made my stomach churn. Well, about that, Harper said, arms crossed. We've turned that room into a sensory playroom for Oliver. The other one? My yoga studio. I swallowed hard. So, where will I stay? I asked, trying to take in the scale of the 5-bedroom home. Oh, Beatrice has the master guest room. She helps with the nanny, Harper said lightly. There's a pull-out sofa in the basement media room, though. Actually, it's quite comfortable. My face went pale. I had given them $100,000 and ended up on a basement sofa, while Beatrice, likely a similar contributor, enjoyed a suite by the nursery. I lingered for an hour, watching Beatrice feed Oliver, Harper complain about the cleaning staff, and Julian arrive, kissing his wife, his mother-in-law, and giving me a hurried side hug before returning to his phone. I left the pie untouched on the counter. Driving home, I sat in silence as the truth sank in. I had been reduced to a bank, a resource to be drained. And they were coming for everything else. 2 weeks later, Julian called, his voice unusually serious. Mom, we need to talk about the Haven. What about it? I asked, glancing at the peeling wallpaper I had meant to fix. It's too much for you. Taxes, maintenance. It's a money pit. Harper, and I think you should sell. Sell it? This is my home, Julian. This is where your father is. Dad is gone, Mom, he said sharply. The market's at a peak. You could get nearly $2 million. Move into a managed condo, invest the rest. Start a college fund for Oliver. Maybe even a vacation home in Aspen. You're just existing there. His words cut deeper than I expected. To him, my life, my memories, my sanctuary, were mere inefficiencies to liquidate. He didn't see me as a person, only as a holder of assets. I said I'd think about it, and I did. I wandered through the Haven for 3 days, tracing the woodwork Arthur had sanded, breathing in the salty air, remembering laughter and tears. And then it hit me. If I gave in, sold everything for them, nothing would change. I'd remain the basement guest, only now homeless and stripped of security. Righteous anger replaced sorrow. I called Robert Henderson, a lawyer and longtime friend of Arthur. Robert, I want to donate the Haven, I said. A long silence followed. Donate it? That's a multi-million-dollar property. Julian. He has his inheritance, I interrupted. He has his career, his education, and the $100,000 I already gave him. The house? It belongs to something bigger now. I explained my plan. A local nonprofit, New Beginnings, provided shelter for women escaping domestic violence. Women starting over. Children in need of safety. The Haven would become their sanctuary. Robert tried to dissuade me, suggested a trust, but I was unwavering. I signed the papers. Ownership was irrevocably transferred. I retained the right to live there for life, but the property itself was no longer mine. A weight lifted I hadn't realized I carried. The house was safe. It would never be sold for a ski chalet, never redesigned by Harper's interior team. It belonged to those who needed it most, and in giving it away, I healed. I waited until Thanksgiving to tell Julian. Likely, they had invited me expecting pressure, trying to coax me into selling. I arrived in Medina, head high, sharply dressed. The house smelled of sage and catered luxury. Beatrice clutched a champagne glass, pearls gleaming. "Eleanor," she said, "Julian says you're finally being sensible about the old ruin of yours. We can list it next month." Harper's eyes stayed glued to her phone. "I have a realtor friend who specializes in historic flips." We sat for dinner. Crystal and silver shone. Julian carved the turkey. "So, Mom," he said, "have you looked at those condos I sent?" I met his gaze, then glanced at his wife and mother. "I'm not moving to Belltown," I said softly. "And I'm not selling the Haven." The table froze. "It's the only logical move," Julian said, voice tight. "I'm not selling because it's no longer mine to sell," I replied. Harper's fork clattered onto her plate. "What do you mean?" "I donated it to New Beginnings," I said, slicing the turkey. "It will be a shelter for women and children in crisis. I can live here as long as I want, but the property belongs to the charity now." Silence. Then chaos. "You did what?" Julian shouted, tipping his chair back. "Are you insane? That's my inheritance." "It was never just money," I shot back. "It was my life. Your father's labor. A life you called just existing. I gave it to people who need it more than you do." Harper's face reddened. "How could you be so selfish? We have a child, expenses. You have luxury cars, a designer house, and Beatrice. What you don't have is a sense of enough." "I won't be your doormat anymore," I said. Julian threatened legal action, but Robert had prepared. Any attempt to challenge a charity would ruin him publicly before a courtroom. "Get out," Julian hissed. "You're not my mother." "I did this for you," I said calmly, "because the man you were becoming would have sold my memories for a ski trip. Maybe now, you'll have to build something of your own." I left without looking back. Driving home, the silence felt victorious for the first time in years. The aftermath was explosive. Julian blocked me. Harper raged online. Friends were divided between horror and quiet support. I began working with the charity, organizing and preparing the house. I found purpose. I found myself again. 6 months later, a late-night call from Harborview Medical Center shook me. Julian had been injured at a construction site, his leg in traction, his face bruised. I rushed to Seattle, praying. At the hospital, he was broken but alive. "Mom," he whispered. "I'm here." I held his hand as he confessed his failures, financial collapse, and regrets. "Money is just paper. You're alive. That's what matters," I told him. He wept, and I forgave him. Forgiveness didn't mean fixing his mistakes. It meant loving him through them. The fall was brutal. Julian lost the house. Harper filed for divorce. Beatrice disappeared. Slowly, we rebuilt. Julian came to the Haven, using his architectural skills to improve it, sitting with me, talking, connecting again. Watching him teach a child to hammer a nail, he said softly, "You saved me, Mom. If I'd had that house, I would have sold it, spent the money, and stayed hollow. You saving it saved me." Eventually, I moved to a small apartment in Seattle, near Julian and Oliver. Weekends became messy, joyful, and full of blackberry pie. Clinging to things, houses, money, grudges, only weighs you down. True legacy lies in the values you leave behind. My son isn't wealthy. He drives a used truck and rents an apartment. But he is present, building a life on solid ground. And I am no longer an ATM. I am Eleanor. I am a mother. My love has boundaries, but within them, we both breathe freely at last.